Hello everybody, how are you doing today? Very well, I hope you're having a lovely day, whatever it is you're doing, whether it's work or school or flying to the moon or robbing a bank or escaping Venice Penitentiary or fighting the devil. I don't know, and I don't judge. It's great to be back. We are still on the Devil's Engine Hellfighters. Just started the third part of the book, which is called Annihilation. Marlowe and Pan and the others have just realised that all this time fighting to save the world, they've actually been fighting for the wrong side. They've been fighting for Ostheim, who turns out to be a really horrible baddie. So spoiler alert there. And obviously they're quite shocked. And not only have they realised this, but they've also realised that Ostheim now has control of both engines, or both iterations of the same engine, as it turns out, and can now open the gates to hell. But he can't do it quite yet. He's still got to repair the engine and the damage they did. And they've been told by Mammon, who is now dead, who turned out to be a goodie, that they need to find somebody called Meridiana. Who knows where she is, or what she is even. So now they are going to try and find her. So the next chapter is called Contracts. That was a great start, wasn't it? After so long stuck inside the festering anus of hell, a shower felt like heaven. Pan pushed her head into the spray, the powerful water massaging her scalp. It was so hot it was almost scalding, 100 cuts and scrapes and bruises protesting. But the heat was good, scouring her skin, scrubbing her clean of every last trace of the engine. A torrent of black water spiralled around the plug, smoke and dirt and dust and blood. She wished that the shower could cleanse her inside as well, carry away all of the hate and the grief and the guilt. Her soul was blacker now than it had ever been. It didn't make any sense. The day was a blur of disbelief, her mind doing its best to push the truth away. All this time she thought she was fighting for what was right, fighting to save the world. Not a hero, never a hero. She'd killed too many people to ever be called that, and certainly not a saint. But the things she'd done them for the right reason. Take one life and save 1 billion, she'd always told herself. But she'd been taking the wrong lives and put billions more in harm's way. She gripped her hair in her hands, pulling until it hurt. More dirt ran from her, as thick and dark as oil. So much it seemed like it was pouring from inside her, like she was rotten in there. And that was true, wasn't it? She'd been doing the devil's work, and what did that make her, if not something truly evil? It's not your fault, she told herself. You didn't know. But she didn't ask either. She didn't question it. She'd taken Ostheim's words for granted. She'd obeyed him mindlessly. After everything that had happened with Christoph, after she'd almost knocked his head clean off in that apartment in Queens, she'd needed something good. She'd needed a way to redeem herself. When Herc had marched into her cell all those years ago, he'd given her exactly that. You did a bad thing, kiddo, but you know what? It doesn't have to be the end. He'd smiled at her, so much younger, all his teeth still where they were supposed to be, so hard but so kind. And he'd said it. Take one life, save 1 billion. Pick door number 1 and I'll show you how. She'd been so relieved that she'd said yes, and she'd never looked back. Letting go of her hair, she cranked the temperature up even further. She wrapped her hands around herself, shivering despite the heat. It was too bright in here, and she closed her eyes, but all she saw there were the enemy engineers she'd slaughtered. Dozens of them, all those kids in Paris, thrown into a war they couldn't possibly understand, all the ones before that. Not to mention Patrick and his sister Brianna. Pan's stomach cramped at the memory. She hadn't killed Brianna, but she'd captured her and let her die in the worst possible way. Patrick, too, his body fused with the concrete of Rockefeller Plaza, screaming as he held the bloated body of his sister. Oh, God, what did I do to them? It was unimaginable. It was unbearable. Why hadn't they just said something to her? Why hadn't they told her the truth? And they had, she realised. How many times had they told her she was fighting for the wrong side? They told you the truth, but you wouldn't hear it. She pounded her head against the wall again and again, harder each time until a wave of vertigo grabbed her, trying to haul her into the darkness. The exhaustion had completely emptied her, left barely enough inside to keep her standing. Her left leg was actually twitching as her muscles struggled. But there was something else there too, something not entirely unpleasant in the way her body felt. It was as if a cloud had been lifted from her soul. It wasn't just fatigue, she realised. Stretching her fingers out in front of her, she willed up a charge. Just a small one. Nothing happened. Again, drawing it up from deep inside, snapping her fingers like she was sparking a lighter. Her contract had been cancelled. She didn't know whether to scream with fear or howl with laughter. She saw Ostheim, the thing that had posed as Ostheim anyway, stretch its spider limbs into the engine, could picture them probing the machine, flicking those infernal switches and ending her deal as easily as programming a washing machine. If Ostheim was anywhere near as powerful as Mammon said he was, if he knew as much about the engine as Pan feared, then why wouldn't he cancel her contract, leave her defenceless? Hey, at least you don't have to vacation in hell, right? Except sooner or later, once Ostheim had opened the gates, hell would be right here, walking the streets. The whole world would burn. Suddenly the slap of water on her shoulders was too much, too hot. She turned off the shower, her body trembling, steam rising off her. She stood there in silence, trying not to feel anything much at all. Right then, one more thought, one more emotion would be enough to scatter her cells in a million different directions. Eventually, she wasn't sure how much later it was, the cold started to creep back in. She stepped from the cubicle and shivered her way across the bathroom, grabbing a plush dressing gown from the back of the door. Truck had driven them south, through the mountains and well into the night, and now they were in a luxury hotel somewhere in northern Italy. Her room was huge, but it still wasn't large enough for all her ghosts. Her dead, the ones she had killed, the ones she had let die, crowded on the bed, on the carpet, on the desk, in the shadowed corners, all of them watching her. Patrick and Brianna were there too, their twin faces gaunt, their dark eyes accusing. "I didn't know," she whispered to them. "I didn't know." None of them replied, their eyes bulging from cracked sockets, their fly-blown lips speaking soundlessly, their withered fingers reaching for her. She couldn't bear it, so she ran to the door, escaping into the silent, deserted corridor beyond. She slammed it behind her, trapping the dead inside. Where the hell was everyone else? They were scattered through the hotel, but she'd seen Marlowe enter his room, almost directly opposite her own. She ran to it, pounding on the door loud enough to wake everybody on the floor. Everything ached, but at least some of the tiredness had gone, some of that endless ache the engine pushed inside you, like your body was made up of lead and concrete and corrugated iron. She pressed her ear to the wood, hearing nothing. "Marlowe, open the door, goddammit!" she yelled, thumping again. A groan. Footsteps. The click of the lock. Then the door swung open to reveal Marlowe's face. He blinked at her, his mouth hanging open like he'd just woken from 100 years' sleep. That was a real yawn. Sorry. He was wearing nothing but jockey shorts, his lean body a patchwork of scars and bruises. He smelled of the same luxury brand shampoo as she did. It seemed to take him a while to recognise her. "Pan?" he said, after a moment. He yawned. "No, you idiot, it's Santa Claus." She pushed past him into a room lit solely by a table lamp. The bed was ruffled, and she perched on the end of it, drawing cotton threads from her dressing gown and rolling them into balls. Marlowe closed the door and traipsed over, clambering back under the covers. His eyelids looked like they were holding sash weights, and he squinted at her through them. "Can't sleep," he said, yawning again. "I just didn't want to be—" What, she thought, in a room full of ghosts? On your own? "I just thought I heard something. I wanted to check." Marlowe nodded. "I'm cool," he said. "Well, not cool exactly. Not after Dead A. Are you okay?" "Yeah, sure," Pan shot back. The anxiety was a lump of stone right in the middle of her, heavy enough to pull her down through the floor, through the ground, to drown her in the dark. She opened her mouth, and the air refused to come. It took a desperate gulp and a bolt of adrenaline to kick-start her lungs. "My contract's been cancelled." "Yeah," said Marlowe. "That's good, right?" "Great," she said. "When Ostheim comes after us, not having a contract is going to be really helpful." Marlowe sighed, chewing at his knuckles in the infuriating way he always did. She rubbed her chest, over that lump of stone where her heart should be. All she could feel right now was pent-up rage, like there was a live grenade in there too. Pin pulled. "Right," she said, getting to her feet. "Well, this was fun." "Hey, you came to my door, Pan," said Marlowe. She spun around to face him, and for a second she thought the grenade had blown, the world burning white for a second. The anger was boiling up her throat, but she choked it back down, just standing there. Her fists were balled so tightly her finger bones might snap. Why had she come here? Marlowe didn't speak. He just lifted the sheet and tilted his head to invite her in. "Yeah, right," she thought, and almost said. She didn't move, her feet glued to the carpet. It was Marlowe, the guy who'd ruined everything, who'd let Charlie into the nest, who'd led Ostheim right to the engines. "It's not his fault any more than yours," she told herself. "Ostheim had you all fooled." And when she looked at him again, he was just a guy, just a teenage boy, caught up in the same crap storm as her. They were both puppets in a show that neither of them really understood. And the sudden tide of exhaustion that swept through her was enough to carry her to the side of the bed and to climb in beside him. Smiling gently, he lowered the sheet down over her. His hand lingered for a moment, then landed on hers, as delicate and hesitant as a butterfly. They lay there, face to face in the twilight. Pan tongued the gap where she'd lost a tooth, her heart drumming faster now than it had back at the engine. What on earth was going on? Marlowe pulled her close, and she didn't resist, putting her arms around him, her cheek against the smooth skin of his chest. She could hear the thump of his pulse, the soft wheeze of his lungs. He was so warm. He held her tightly, and she let him. She didn't even know why, other than it was quiet here in his room. Being here with him, it kept the ghosts away. She kind of loved him for it. She moved her head, her lips brushing his neck, then his jaw. Her heart was hummingbird fast, no longer made of rock but hollow-boned and light enough to lift right out of her. A smile danced on her lips, and she was suddenly sure. So sure. "We made a deal," she said, her fingers tracing patterns on the bare skin of his arm. "I owe you a kiss." Marlowe murmured, and she pressed her lips to his before he could say anything stupid. She held them there, everything quiet, everything beautifully peaceful, everything perfect. Marlowe opened his lips and started to snore. Pan pulled back in surprise. Marlowe was fast asleep, his mouth hanging open, his nostrils flaring. She gave him a gentle nudge, then a firmer one, but he didn't so much as stir. She wasn't sure whether to be angry or humiliated, but in the end she laughed, returning her face to his chest. His breaths were like the soft whisper of ocean waves, and when she closed her eyes, that's what she saw. Sunlight and surf, golden sands in every direction, and the gulls wheeling overhead. She lay there, in the warmth, in the quiet. She just lay there next to him, and she slept. Aww. The next chapter is called Breathless. The first thing Marlowe noticed when he woke was that he wasn't alone. There was somebody else in the bed. Somebody warm, somebody practically naked. Pan lay on her back next to him, almost drowning in the downy piles of soft sheets and duvets and pillows. She was wearing a dressing gown and had untangled in her sleep to reveal a glimpse of stomach, curving up. It rose and fell gently, and Marlowe might have stared a little longer if he hadn't become aware of the second thing. He couldn't breathe. He tried to inhale, and nothing happened. The panic of it made him sit bolt upright, his fingers clawing at his chest, his neck. He tried again, sounding like a kazoo as he wrenched in a thimbleful of oxygen. Pan was awake now, her eyes wide in alarm as she scrabbled from the bed. She spun around, surveying the room, her fists bunched and ready to fight. When she looked back at Marlowe, her dressing gown hung open. He did his best not to look, then looked. If his asthma had been bad before, it was seriously bad now. "Marlowe!" Pan yelled, following his eyes and pulling the gown closed. "What the hell?" "Can't breathe." He couldn't get the words out, lurching onto his knees. He coughed as hard as he could, the blockage like industrial glue in his lungs. "Oh, for God's sake!" Pan jumped back onto the bed and slapped him on the back, hard enough to send him sprawling. "I'm not joking," he tried to say, rolling off the bed, winded now as well as wheezing. He made for the door, his accordion lungs turning him into a one-man band. Wrenching it open, he ran down the corridor and around the corner, jamming a hand on the elevator button. "Marlowe, where are you going?" Pan shouted as she followed, knotting her dressing gown cord. They entered the elevator together. "Inhaler," Marlowe stuttered, snatching in a breath between each syllable. He was awake enough now for it to have sunk in. Ostheim had cancelled his contract. "Oh," said Pan. "Hang on." The journey down to the lobby seemed to take 100 years. He didn't wait for the doors to open fully, just squeezed through them and ran for the reception. There were 2 women and a man there, and they all saw him coming, one of them reaching for a phone. Marlowe slapped his hands on the desk, pointing to his chest. Not that he needed to. He was pretty sure he was turning blue. He hauled in a couple of shallow breaths, and it was like trying to douse a house fire with a water pistol, the fear and inferno inside him. His vision was turning charcoal black at the edges. Nobody was moving. "He needs help," said Pam. "Asthma, an inhaler." The receptionists stared at one another, but still nobody budged. Pan leapt over the desk, scattering paper. Marlowe tried to follow, but he didn't have the energy for the jump. He ran around the side, ignoring the protests. Pam was already through the back door, and he tailed her into an office. His legs were fast running out of steam, and he crashed into a chair, each breath like there was a boulder on his chest. Pan grabbed a green first aid case off the wall, its contents flying as she opened it up. She dug among the band-aids and the painkillers, and it seemed like a million years later that she held up a small turquoise inhaler. "This?" she said. Marlowe had no idea, but he nodded and she threw it at him. He reached for it, missed, and it bounced off his face. "Sorry," said Pan, picking it up and handing it over. He put the end in his mouth and pressed, and again, "Please, please," until the pressure began to ease. He sucked in air, everything crackling like his respiratory system was made of popping candy. By the time he'd calmed down, the receptionists were hovering in the doorway, yelling at them in Italian. "Better?" Pan said, ignoring them. He wasn't sure if he could speak yet, so he nodded, wiping the foam from his lips. "Good," she said, grabbing his hand and lifting him out of the seat. Together they walked out of the hotel lobby. There was a small crowd of people there, all of them watching. One of them was Herc, sipping coffee from a china mug. He'd done his best to clean himself up, but the old guy still looked like a bear that had wandered in from the forest. He did a double take when he spotted them. "Oh, for the love of," he started to say, putting the cup down and beckoning to them. He flashed an apologetic smile to the receptionist. "Bambini, eh? Kids today are always up to something." He waited until Pan and Marlowe were close enough, before grabbing them each by the upper arm and steering them back towards the elevators. Only when they were safely inside did he let them go. "You want to tell me how that can be classed as keeping a low profile?" he said. "No fuss, no drama. I thought we'd agreed." They had, on the agonisingly slow ice cream truck ride over. Paris had been nuked. It was all over the news. Nobody had the slightest idea who was behind it, but it didn't take much to get people talking. "His contract was cancelled," said Pam. "He woke up and he couldn't breathe. What was I supposed to do?" "Use the phone, maybe," he replied as the elevator dinged its way up. "Damn it, Charlie's contract's been cancelled too. Told me this. Wait, how did you know he woke up like that?" Pan turned away, focusing on the wall like there was a TV screen. Herc looked at Marlowe, one eyebrow conducting a lone foraging mission on his forehead. Was the only thing Marlowe could think of to say. "Oh, for the love of everything holy," Herc muttered. The elevator stopped and the door slid open. "We leave in 15 minutes, he said, stepping out. "Meet me in the lobby. Don't be late. And guys, put some clothes on. What is it with you young ones and running around naked?" He threw them another look, then disappeared. Marlowe glanced down at himself, realising he was wearing nothing but his jockey shorts. He covered himself up while Pan pressed the button for their floor. She didn't so much as glance at him, her attention firmly fixed on the numbers as they flicked up. Marlowe thought back, trying to remember anything from last night. He'd just been so exhausted. He could recall her knocking on the door, waking him up. He could recall her knocking on the door, waking him up, then climbing into bed with him. Wait, she climbed into bed with me? What happened last night? He said. "Did we..." Pan spluttered a laugh. "You were upset. I couldn't face you blubbering all night. End of." He could still feel her there, though. Her body pressed against his. He had to angle himself against the wall, yelling, "Think of something else, think of something else." But all he could picture was her, lying there beside him, and something else too. Her lips pressed against his as he drifted into sleep. "Wait. You kissed me," he said, grinning. He put his fingers to his lips. "You totally kissed me." "What? No way, Marlowe. You must have dreamed it." But she still hadn't turned to face him. He could just about feel the heat radiating from her cheeks. "You did," he said. "Last night you kissed me." "Oh, whatever," she said. The elevator slowed to a halt, the doors sliding open. Pan walked out so quickly she bumped her arm on the way, lurching into the corridor. "You kissed me," he shouted after her, the grin making his face feel like it was being stretched on the rack. She didn't look back, just stuck up her middle finger. 13 minutes, Marlowe, she yelled. He gave her a head start, then walked back to his room, letting himself in. He must have slept 9 hours straight, but all he wanted to do was throw himself back beneath the covers, back into the sweet shampoo smell of her. After yesterday, he could have been unconscious for a week solid and still woken up tired. But the thought of Herc dragging him from his bed in 12 minutes was enough to keep him standing. He used the restroom and slung on the clothes he'd brought from a gas station somewhere in the Alps. Truck had stopped the truck after a few hours and declared that the smell was so bad he couldn't focus on the road. They weren't exactly fashionable, a pair of green combat pants and a black t-shirt that claimed "ski you again soon," but at least they didn't reek of violence and death. He pocketed the inhaler, giving it a shake first to gauge how much was left. Enough, he thought. Although if the world really was about to end, then it might be wise to stock up. Nothing was guaranteed to bring on an asthma attack, like a demon chasing you down the street. The thought brought him home, to where he kept his spares. The memory was so vivid, it had the effect of a punch to the solar plexus, and he had to sit on the bed before another attack came on. He could see the cupboard beside his bed, always buried beneath soda bottles and candy wrappers and the glasses of water he took to bed each night. His bed, too, never made unless his mum was having a good day and she did it for him. He lay back and closed his eyes, and for a blissful moment, he was right back there on Staten Island, horns blaring outside and the smell of the city drifting in through the open window, about to head to school or go hang out with Charlie. For those few seconds, he was right there, and it broke his heart. He snapped his eyes open, reality rushing back, all the more powerful for having been momentarily forgotten. It seemed utterly ridiculous. No, it seemed impossible that just 1 day ago he'd been waging a war beneath the streets of Paris, fighting in a battle that would decide the fate of the planet. He laughed at the absurdity of it, but the laughter was hollow, and it ended in a sob. He sat up, knuckling his eyes, everything flashing white. He thought about the last time he'd seen his mum, her chasing him from the house, the dog trying to chew his face off. She hadn't even recognised him. She'd have no idea where he was, no idea if he was even alive. There was a monitor on the desk in his room, the hotel logo spinning lazily on the screen. A keyboard sat next to it, and Marlowe walked over, prodding the mouse to wake it up. It took him a moment to work out how to access the web browser, then another 5 minutes to remember the password for his Gmail before it finally loaded. 12 pages of junk, insurance claims, injury compensation, online degrees, a notification that his Xbox Gold membership was about to expire. Sadly, nothing about dealing with demons. He found an old email from his mum. "Hey Marlowe, I got my phone working, can you tell me if you get this, mum?" And he clicked reply. "Hey mum," he typed, popping his lips, the cursor blinking impatiently at him. "Sorry I haven't been in touch, been real busy. Got a new job, was a mad rush. Nothing bad, don't worry, all legit. You could even say I was saving the world." Saving it? He'd pretty much single-handedly destroyed it. "So yeah," he typed as he thought, "things are cool, but mum, I think something bad might be coming. Something really bad." Hell is coming, he thought, clamping his mouth shut so he wouldn't spew all over the keyboard. "Just make sure you stay safe, promise? Lock the doors, get some bottled water and flashlight batteries." Yeah, that would really help. "I love you," he wrote, his eyes burning, the type suddenly blurry. "I really do. I'll be back soon, okay? Just don't worry." He read it back, touching the cold screen with the tips of his fingers as if he could send a thought alongside it, send something of himself. "I'll be back soon," he said, as if by speaking the lie aloud he would somehow make it true. Then he clicked send. There was nothing else for him to pack. Logging out of the computer, he left his room and slogged back down to the lobby. There was nobody else there, but when he looked through the big glass doors, he saw them all in front of the hotel, basking in the sunlight. Herc, Pan, Truck and Charlie stood to one side, Claire and Jamie on the other. They all looked over at him, and their collective grins seemed brighter than the shimmering white walls of the hotel. All except for Pan, who looked like she'd just swallowed a cheese grater. "Morning, lover boy," said Truck, his laughter like the distant rumble of a storm. "Oh, God," thought Marlowe. "I warned you," Pan said, jabbing a finger at Truck. "Sorry," Truck said, holding up his hands. "Just hate to see you fight. Can't you kiss and make up?" Pan stormed at him, ready to swing. Herc stepped between them like a boxing referee, pushing her away. "Cool it, Pan," he said. She turned away, glaring at Marlowe like it was all his fault. "Okay," said Herc. "You guys had enough? Let's go." He walked off the forecourt, heading around the side of the hotel and into a parking lot. It was sweltering, even though it wasn't quite 7 in the morning. The concrete swam in a heat haze, and Marlowe half expected to see demons dragging themselves from the molten earth. Charlie cleared his throat. So like I was saying, my mom told me that's what it meant, Circulus Inferni. Not the circle of hell, like a group of devil worshippers or something. More like, I don't know, a circle, like a wall, like a prison. That's what they meant. They wanted to lock hell inside a circle to stop the bad things getting out. "Bit late to be finding that out," muttered Herc. "And the fist," Charlie went on, "is not so much a fist that strikes hell, but one that strikes with the force of hell." "Who the hell thought these names up?" said Truck. "And in Latin too. Why didn't they just have the good guys and the evil mothers? Would have saved us a bit of heartache." "Oh, it doesn't matter," said Herc, leading them past the parked cars. "First, circle. Fist, circle. None of that means anything anymore. You just have to know one thing. We're Hellraisers, raising hell to save the world. That's us, okay?" Nobody replied, and Herc tutted loudly as he led them towards a minibus with British licence plates. "St. Agatha's Convent of the Sacred Heart," Charlie said, reading the elaborate script on the side of the bus. Bus? "Let's just say St. Agatha doesn't want us riding in the cab of an ice cream truck anymore," said Herc, sliding open the door. You're stealing a bus that belongs to a bunch of nuns, aren't you?" Marlowe said. "They're lending it," said Herc. "Without knowledge or consent. Not like I ain't going to hell already. Hang on." He held out a hand to stop Charlie from entering the bus. "Look, I'm not going to lie to you," he said, squinting into the sun. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his grey stubble. "Ostheim has taken the engines. I don't know how long it will take him, but he will find a way of bringing them together and opening the gates of hell. Of that, there is absolutely no doubt. An hour, a day, a week, a month, then all of this becomes a wasteland, a feeding ground for hell's worst." Marlowe looked across the parking lot, seeing a couple strolling from their car, the mum carrying a wide-eyed toddler. Past them an old couple, the man in a wheelchair, in the shade of the hotel awning, waiting for a taxi. Past them, a valley town, buildings glittering, looking like they carried the mountains on their shoulders. How many people there? How many in this country? This continent? 7 billion people on the planet, and none of them could do a damn thing about what was about to happen. "I honestly don't know if there's anything we can do to stop it," Herc said. "We've got no powers, no contracts, no weapons. We only..." He swallowed, something dark boiling in his eyes. "We only found out what side we were fighting on a day ago. We don't even know if this woman, Meridiana, can help us." "Herc," said Pan, "you really need to work on your motivational speeches." "Yeah, watch Braveheart, dude," said Truck. "Freedom!" "All I'm saying," Herc continued, "is that I won't blame any of you if you decide you don't want to get on this bus. Some of you have family, friends, people you might want to say goodbye to. You turn around and walk away, and I won't hate you for it. I'll even get you home. If the world's ending, then there's nothing wrong with wanting to see it out with the ones you love." "Who the hell are you, and what have you done with Herc?" said Pan. "I'm not..." "Are you going soft on us, old man?" Truck said. "Maybe we should take him back inside," said Marlowe, smiling. "I think the hotel has a babysitting service for toddlers." "Hey! Just get out of the way," said Charlie, nudging Herc to the side. "It's hot out here." "Yeah," said Truck, rustling his pockets. "I've got half my minibar in here and it's losing its cool." How you guys managed to evade Mammon so long, I have no idea," muttered Jamie, stomping up the steps. "Dictionary definition of unprofessional." Claire followed her, still rubbing her gut and looking like she'd eaten a pound of out-of-date shrimp. Pan put a hand on Herc's chest. "Got nowhere else to go," she said, "and even if I did, I'm here for the ride." She started up the steps, then dropped back down. "One more word about last night, though, and you're on your own." She disappeared into the shade of the bus. Marlowe took one last look east, the sun hauling its liquid bulk up over the roof of the hotel. Then he turned the other way, west, towards home. That way was his mum, sure, but here, right here, was his family. "Let's kick Ostheim out on his arse," he said to Herc. "New York City can wait. We're Hellraisers, like you say." "Good man," said Herc, clapping him so hard on the shoulder he almost tripped up the steps. Herc slid the door shut, running around and clambering into the driver's seat. He started the engine, then turned to face them all. "I," he croaked, looking like he was trying to swallow a loaf of bread in one go. "I really—" "Yeah," said Marlowe. "We love you too. Now get us out of here before those nuns come back and catch us sinners red-handed." Mirror, mirror. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we can fit in another couple of chapters, I reckon. Maybe one. Mirror, mirror. Venice was as beautiful as Pan expected, but it stank like a public bathroom. The place was mobbed too, tourists clogging the streets like artery-blocking sludge, their sweaty bodies rubbing against Pan every time she tried to squeeze past. Most of them were American, their shirts so bright and their chatter so loud she could have been back in Times Square or any other nightmarish tourist mecca in her hometown. One guy, who had to have been even larger than Truck, almost decapitated her while taking a video on his cell with a selfie stick, and she'd flicked her fingers his way before she remembered she didn't have any electrostatic electricity left to taser him with. Just as well, really, because as they crossed yet another stone bridge, a couple of polizia walked past, both of them eyeballing Herc. With his wounds, both old and new, he looked like the bad guy in a Bruce Willis movie. He was holding a map they'd brought from a vendor in St. Mark's Square, not that it had done them much good so far. "You sure that's all he told you?" Herc growled as he pushed through the mob, scanning the street names. He ducked into an alleyway between the rickety jumbled buildings that crowded the saltwater lagoons. True to form, gondolas were idly cruising the waters, families and couples lazing on them and eating gelato. If any of them had so much as glimpsed what had gone down in Paris yesterday, they would have scooped out their own brains and thrown them into the dirty water. "That's all he said," Pan replied. A screaming toddler bounced off her knee, and it took every ounce of willpower she had not to punt it into the water. A shop in the old town, a mirror shop. Why would one of the Pentarchy, why would one of the Pentarchy, with all the power in the world, work in a shop? Charlie asked, popping gum. "Not working," said Pan, "hiding. Makes sense to hide in plain sight, right?" He shrugged. "None of this makes sense." They exited the other side of the alleyway onto a cobbled walkway lined with houses that could have been built 1,000 years ago. They were so crooked that she didn't know how they were still standing. Most had to be shops, their small dark windows full of displays of soft toys, dolls, furniture, chocolates. Most of these looked untouched in just as long, lost beneath cobwebs as thick as sheets, drowning in dust. The doors were closed, some of them barricaded. There were no people here, not one, and it wasn't hard to work out why. "Feel like I've just taken a sledgehammer to the family jewels," said Truck. "Anyone else getting that?" Pan had no idea what that would feel like, but she could sense there was something bad back here, no doubt about it. "You ever speak about her?" Pan asked, sidling up to the redhead, Jamie. She'd not said much at all since leaving Paris, but it was there in every look she threw at Pan or Marlowe or Herc. "You did this." And there it was again, pure hate, her eyes burning. "No," she said, spitting the word up like it was acid. "He told us she existed and that she was best left alone. He told us she'd once been like him, fighting Ostheim in the fist. Said she was injured so badly that she just ran, went into hiding. He hadn't seen her in, I don't know." 100 years, said Charlie. "More, maybe. He wasn't sure." "He told you," Marlowe said, joining them. "He told me everything," said Charlie. "It was the only way he could make me believe he was on the right side. Meridiana was his sister, I think." That made sense, Pan thought. She'd seen it herself, hadn't she? The truth, when she'd touched Maman's hand. "His sister," said Jamie. Charlie nodded. "Far as I know, they were all brothers and sisters. Maman, Meridiana, Ostheim too. Then something happened, something bad. Ostheim turned against the others. They've been fighting for, I don't know, forever. The last time they met, Meridiana lost her mind. Maman never saw her again." "All that time, though," said Marlowe. "How is that even possible?" "All this, and you're asking how that's possible," said Pan. "The engines," said Jamie. "Use them enough and they become part of you. They change you. Maman, Meridiana and Ostheim too. That arsehole was one of the Pentarchy and nobody even knew it." Pan saw him now, his body erupting into darkness, those black limbs pouring out of him like a nest of snakes. She'd never seen anything like it, never seen anything so powerful. Even Maman, with all his power, had lasted just seconds against him. "So if she hasn't been seen in 100 years and she's crazy," said Marlowe, "then why are we looking for her?" It was a good enough question, and Pan didn't have an answer other than, "What else have we got?" Great, muttered Marlowe. They walked on, past more shops shut and shuttered. That's a confusing sentence. The rumble of the crowds was now a distant murmur, whisper quiet. The group's footsteps on the cobbles, the loudest thing in the world. Pan felt something tickle the back of her neck and went to brush off a mosquito. It happened again, not an insect, but something else. Something watching. She could feel it as clearly as if their mad, bulging eyes were pressed against her skin. She didn't want to look back, but she did anyway. Just Marlowe and Claire, both of them exhausted. "Oh, we're close," she said with a shudder. "Yeah," said Marlowe, pointing a hand across the street. "Mirrors." A building sat there, something out of a fairy tale, each floor jutting further out over the street. The peeling white paint had to be the only thing holding it together. The leaded windows were dark and blind. There was a sign over the faded red door, almost illegible. "Meridiana's," Pan read. "So she's been hiding forever," said Charlie. "Nobody can find her, but she put her name on the front of the shop. Am I missing something here?" Herc was already crossing the street, one hand stretched out for the door's brass handle. "Wait," yelled Pan. "Hang on, this doesn't feel right." "What's new?" Herc said. He flashed her a grimace, and then twisted the handle. The door resisted for a second, then groaned inward. Herc waved away a cloud of dust, peering into the gloom of the interior. "Hello?" he yelled. "Anyone here? Meridiana?" Nothing. Pan walked to the door, the cool current of air that blew from it refreshing in the muggy heat. Squinting, she could just about make out a room full of ghosts beyond, a dozen old white sheets draped over what could have been furniture and what could have been people. "That's not creepy at all," she said. "I'm not going first," said Marlowe behind her. She tutted, crossing the threshold. Her feet crunched on broken glass, so much of it on the floor that it could have been snow. It wasn't just cold inside, it was freezing, her skin breaking into goosebumps like the devil was breathing down her neck. She fought the urge to retreat, shivering into the room. It stank of age and time, the dust choking her as though she'd pressed her face into a funeral shroud of a long-dead corpse. She took another crunching step, the sound of it echoing around the room. Ahead, one of the sheets rippled. Pan spread her fingers. "Oh, crap." Then she reached for a crossbow. "Oh, double crap." She bunched her fist. Whatever was under there, she could still pound its nose into its brain. "Hello!" Herc's shout made her jump, a scream trying to rip its way out of her throat. Two more of the sheets billowed, and a quiet, shrill cry rose up from the other side of the room, barely there. It was followed by a whisper, fast and low, tickling her ear like a fly's wings. She couldn't catch what it said. "Keep moving," Herc said to her. It wasn't like she had a choice. Everybody was tiptoeing through the door behind her, pushing her into the shop. The room was small, a rectangle of darkness at the far end where a passageway led deeper. Herc gave her another shove, and her fingers brushed against one of the sheets. It was clammy, and it moved against her like it was trying to take her hand. She recoiled with a groan, a tremor running through her. That whine again, like a child's cry. And was that a choked sob that followed, the sound of a hanged man, or was it just the thunder of her pulse? "Hello!" Herc said for a third time, his voice shaking. The sheets rustled together, all of them flapping in a wind that Pan couldn't feel. And the sound of it was like whispers in her ear, so clear that she could almost make out words. "Is he lost? Where is my..." The sheet reached out for her again, actually curling around her hand like seaweed wrapping itself around the limbs of a drowning woman. This time Pan grabbed it back and pulled, whipping it away. Tendrils of dust burrowed into her mouth, her eyes, and when the sheet fell lifelessly to the ground, there was a mirror there. It stood about 6 feet tall, a slab of dark glass mounted in a frame of long dead flesh. It looked like something taken from a serial killer's apartment, something knitted together from dead skin and yellow bone. There was even a face. Pan saw, at the very top of the frame, so old and withered and desiccated that it didn't look like it could ever have been human. The shrunken head stared back at her with beady black eyes, a doll's eyes, alive but dead at the same time. "What the..." said Marlowe, appearing next to her in the mirror and taking a puff on his inhaler. Charlie joined on the other side, pulling an expression of disgust. The glass was dark, stained at the edges with something that might have been black rust. It was warped, Pan's skin mottled and distorted, but no amount of damage to the glass could explain what was going on in the mirror. Right in front of Charlie was a reflection, but it wasn't his. It was Marlowe's. In front of Marlowe stood Charlie. When Pan lifted her right hand, her reflection in the glass did the same. It wasn't a mirror image. It was more like looking at the feed from a security camera. They weren't seeing a reflection, she understood. They were seeing what the mirror saw. "Never seen you look so good, Marlowe," said Charlie. But there was an edge to his voice. He stepped away from the mirror, and so did Pan, quickly. Jamie had tugged away another sheet, the mirror behind it wider and squatter, mounted on an old table. It, too, had a frame that belonged in a mortuary. This one had 4 faces on it, 1 to each corner. They were like death masks, and they stared blindly back at her. "Who would make these?" said Jamie, brushing a shaking hand through her red hair. Pan didn't answer. The second mirror was tilted so that she could see the reflection of the ceiling. Had something moved there between the ornate painted carvings? She glanced up. Nothing, but when she turned to the mirror again, she could definitely make out movement snaking between the antique bosses. "Cover it," she said quietly. "Why?" Jamie replied. "It's just a—" Something ran at them on the other side of the mirror, fast and hard. Pan could hear the thunder of hooves as if a bull was charging across the room. A shape hit the glass hard enough to shunt the table 3 feet across the room, a jagged crack splitting the mirror in 2. Jamie fell back, Herc trying to catch her, and both of them sprawling to the glass-covered floor. Inside the mirror was a creature the likes of which Pan had never seen before. It was a tumorous mass of sinew and muscle, like somebody had skinned a dog and thrown it into a wood chipper only to attempt to stitch it back together again. It stood on 4 legs in the same way as a gorilla, its top half too big for its lower body. The face, though, is what made Pan stagger away, what made her want to dive back into the day and stare at the sun until her eyes burned out. It was made up of teeth, hundreds of them arranged in concentric rings and grinding like an industrial blender. It had no eyes, no nose, just row upon row of those jagged shark teeth. It charged again, butting the glass with the ugly slab of its head. The crack widened, another one splintering in the top corner. The creature snorted from the red pit of its throat, and a tongue extended, as wet and grey as old beef. It licked the mirror, probing it. It was making soft sounds, as she realised it was sniffing, even though it didn't have a nose. Something about that noise was so familiar, and when the creature reared again, every muscle bulging as it tried to slam those jaws down on the glass, she understood why. "Oh my God," she said, "it's a demon." It lunged again, trying to pound its way through. The glass cried out as if it was screaming for help. Any second now it was going to shatter. "Move!" she shouted, running to where the sheet had fallen. She picked it up, shaking it like she was making her bed. It flopped over the mirror, and she wrenched down the corners until the glass was covered. More choking snorts, the shrill whine of cracking glass. "I've never—" "Shut up!" she hissed at Herc. "Nobody make a sound." Nobody did. The room suddenly choked with quiet. Over the roar of her heart, Pan listened to the sound of the demon sniffing, then the soft rumble of its feet as it galloped away. Even then, she held her breath for as long as she could. "I've never seen a demon like that," Herc said, picking himself up and helping Jamie to her feet. They both brushed broken glass from their clothes. Neither had Pan. The demons could exist in this world only if they possessed inanimate matter. It's why they almost always burst from walls and floors and furniture and enormous bronze lion statues. This one looked like it had been made of flesh. It looked like a living, breathing thing. Because it was a living, breathing thing. "It's what they look like before they cross," she said as it suddenly clicked. "It's what they look like in hell." And when Ostheim succeeded in opening the gates, she realised, that's what they would look like when they poured through. There would be no need for them to possess matter. They'd teem into this world like a plague of locusts. "Anyone want to guess what they're doing inside that?" Marlowe said, nodding at the mirror. "Security," said Herc. "Gotta be. It's what my mum must have meant when he said she was hiding. She's in one of these." Crazy chick, hiding inside a mirror, guarded by demons. Why the hell not? Marlowe shook his head, biting at his knuckles. "Which one?" said Charlie, nodding at the passageway. "There are loads, and there might be more through there." And that, said Pam, is how she's stayed hidden for so long. She blew out a sigh. Hey, Meridiana, she said. Look, I don't know if you can even hear me, but we need your help. We work with Maman. Even saying it now, after everything she'd learned in the last day, felt utterly wrong. He told us to come and find you. More whispers, but they were drowned out by a throbbing growl from the other side of the room. The sound of claws scratching at glass. Something was prowling there inside a mirror, something big. Pan broke away from the group, weaving her way through the sheets until she reached the passageway. It was pitch black inside, but there was a shimmer of light at the other end. Feeling her way down the wall, she stepped into another room, this one twice as big and twice as full. Dozens of mirrors sat beneath their dust sheets, lit by a trickle of honey-coloured light from the room's single shuttered window. Nothing moved, aside from the swirling clouds of dust. It was hopeless. How were they supposed to find her? Pan walked to the nearest mirror and lifted the sheet. It was the same deal, a macabre frame made from the dead, holding a plane of dark, warped glass. She could see herself there, and the shop behind her, but there was something wrong with the reflection again, the walls crumbling, a hole in the middle of the floor. "What have you done with him?" The words were louder now, coming not from here, but from the corner of the room. Pan lowered the sheet, cocking her head to catch another line. "No more, I cannot." She checked over her shoulder to make sure the others were there, the 6 of them cowering in the passageway, watching her. Then she made her way across the room. The sheets fluttered in her wake, whispering to one another. "Be careful, Pan," Herc said. "Duh." "Meridiana," she said. Is that you?" More soft words, and a sound that made her think of a tiger padding through the woods, big feet keeping time with her. Something snorted again, testing the air. There were 5 mirrors clustered in the corner, separate from the others. The largest one stood before several of various smaller sizes. It made Pan think of a mother shielding her children from something terrible. "Do not, or I will." There and gone again, a distant voice on the wind. Pan reached the large mirror. It had to be 8 feet tall and half that in width, and lifted the sheet. Another Pan peered back, the dark glass making her look even more exhausted than she felt. Again, the reflection didn't completely show the truth, the room behind her flickering. She leaned in, saw that inside the mirror the walls and floor were teeming with spiders, great big fat ones that swarmed over her reflection, pushing between her lips, into her eyes. The other her smiled, sticking out a too long tongue and using it to scoop a giant hairy spider into its mouth. Pan let go of the sheet, hearing the crunch of her reflection's teeth, a wet swallow, then laughter, a childish giggle. Never was one for. "Charlie," said Pan. "Did Maman say anything else about his family? Brothers, sisters? Were there 4 of them?" 5, he said, but one was Ostime. Pan walked behind the spider mirror and looked at the others. The smallest sat to the side, maybe 4 feet tall beneath its sheet. They got bigger from left to right, the largest standing a couple of inches taller than her. She went to that one first, peeking beneath the cover. Another Pan stared back, then burst into flames, a conflagration so powerful that it scorched the glass. Pan could feel the heat of it against her face. She staggered back, bumping into the tall mirror behind her hard enough to make it rock. In the glass she watched herself blacken and twist, her skin popping as the fat beneath exploded, her eyeballs hissing as the moisture in them boiled. "No," she didn't quite say, dropping the sheet and putting her hands to her ears until the sound of sizzling flesh ebbed away. She reached for the next mirror, her fingers shaking so much she almost couldn't grab the covering. She didn't want to look, but she did. Her face here was bloated beyond all recognition, her eyes so cloudy they could have belonged to a fish, her skin peeling off in strips. There was a mark around her throat that she couldn't figure out, not until she saw the figures swinging from the ceiling behind her reflection, dozens of them, hanging there like flies on sticky strip. They're not really there, she thought, but she looked back anyway. No hanged men behind her, just Charlie and Marlowe creeping across the room. Charlie squinted into the glass and put a hand to his mouth. "Dude," was all he said. "Show you no matter." "You hear that?" she asked them, when the whisper had faded. They both nodded. "Maman told me about his brother," said Charlie. "Ostime strung him up, hung him." "And one of them burned, right?" said Pam. Charlie nodded, turning 3 shades paler. Alive, he said. Pan let the sheet drop over her own dead face, turning to the second smallest mirror. Was Meridiana older or younger than Maman? She asked. No idea, said Charlie. She took a deep, shuddering breath and lifted the sheet in front of her. The movement provoked a reaction from the back of the room. That same growl as before, something stalking them, something warning them. Her face was there, or at least part of it, a chunk ripped away. She could see her brain flecked with chips of shattered skull, and when she put her hand there, a bolt of pain lanced through her. Grunting, she tried to focus on the churning darkness behind her reflection. Something was moving, something fast, something snake-like. It almost looked like... A black, sinewy limb darted towards the glass, whip-cracking against her reflection. Her head split near enough in two, blood and brain exploding. She let go of the sheet, falling back into Marlowe. He held her, and she held him, until she could swallow her heart back down into her chest. Nearly there, not long. That's what happened to Maman, said Marlowe, when she'd let go. Looked like Ostheim behind him. So she had 3 brothers, Pan said, not including Ostheim, that is. 1 burned, 1 hanged, 1 pulled to pieces. And that leaves her, said Marlowe. The last mirror. Pan smeared her sweaty palms on her pants, wondering what horror she would find here. When she lifted the sheet, though, there was nobody there. Not her, or Charlie, or Marlowe. Just the room, lying empty. Almost empty. 1 mirror stood alone in the reflection, in the opposite corner. It wasn't particularly big or particularly small, concealed with a dust sheet. Pan looked over her shoulder, searching the packed room until she saw the mirror that was inside the mirror. Hey, Herc, she said, go take the sheet off that one over there. Herc grumbled his way across the room, saying, This one! When she nodded, he grabbed the sheet and pulled it away, squinting. He ran a hand over his stubble. Nothing here except a handsome guy who needs a shave, he said. Pan turned to the little mirror again. The dust cover in the reflection had gone too, revealing the same skeletal frame and dark dappled glass. You think that's the one? Marlowe asked. Is it? Is it the one? The whispers echoed around the room, like they were mocking her. She was about to reply when she saw something moving inside the reflected mirror, just a tiny flicker to start with, growing bigger and faster. More importantly, Marlowe said, how do we get inside it? The thing inside the mirror that was inside the mirror barreled forward, the whole room starting to shake with the force of it. Pan spun around, looking at the actual mirror, and at Herc standing next to it. Dust rained from the ceiling onto him, and he waved it away, coughing. What? He said when he saw her expression. Get away! She screamed. Too late. The mirror next to Herc exploded outwards, something bursting through in a hail of glass. Herc didn't even have time to scream before a pair of jaws clamped around his stomach. In a flash of marbled flesh and muscle and bone-yellow teeth, he was hauled inside the broken glass. He was gone. Uh-oh. I seem to end every chapter with uh-oh. Yeah, let's leave it there for today because we're coming up for the hour mark. I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you've got 6 chapters left. That's crazy. So we will probably finish it this week. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Poor old Herc. I hope he's all right. Yeah. And yeah, well, have a nice rest of your day, whatever you're doing. And I will see you very soon, hopefully tomorrow. But yeah, love you guys. Look after yourselves. And yeah, take care and all those other things. And yeah, see you soon. Bye.